sources about the most critical information of genuine apparent threats to our national security. So number 2 in my item is a book that every single person on the planet should read. It's called UFOs and Extraordinary Encounters at U.S. and foreign nuclear weapon sites. And it's by Robert Hastings, who's the world's foremost researcher on the subject of UFO activity at nuclear weapon sites. Okay. And this book, I have it in my hand. This book is over 550 pages long. I have read this book, and every single page of this book should have been being discussed in these hearings, and yet we're told that every single thing in this book, effectively, is not part of, and probably won't be part of, the database of this Navy-headed new office. I find that shocking, frankly.
Barbara?
Yeah.
Barbara? Yeah.
Right. And then exit right.
There was an article posted just today on space.com. It was just a few hours ago, so it was, couldn't end up on the show page. But it was a rundown about the hearing, and they have a nice still photograph, which everybody asked for, of that hypersonic UAP that went zipping by a plane, so that you can see what it actually looks like, and it's like a sphere. But the point is they mentioned the Malcolm thing, and they said the alleged
right, and then exit right.
Tampering with missiles, yeah. And I thought, okay, they're mutating the narrative slightly here, because people noticed that they wouldn't, they claimed to not know anything about it at the hearing, so I think alleged. So anyway, go back to what you're saying, because I think it's relevant.
They said that it wasn't in their database.
Right. Mm-hmm. Barbara, Daniel, either one of you familiar that the Navy filed a patent for an electric propulsion system that lets you fly thousands of miles an hour, not only through the air, but under the water, and make 90-degree right-angle turns at full speed because it negates inertia? Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, when was that?
That they patented that like back in 2018
Go straight on.
or 2019, and that's when they let the cat out the bag about, oh yeah, these videos are real, because when they got anonymously released, nobody said anything until suddenly the Navy comes up years later and goes, oh yeah, by the way, here's the real videos, and yes, they are real.
Right.
And they filed this patent for this electric propulsion system that negates inertia, and that's why they're in discharge of all of this, because it's not the Air Force, but it's the Navy that's filing this patent.
The military...
Are you aware of that?
It seems a little bizarre to me. I mean, the Navy isn't going to seek a public patent for a classified technology.
And then turn
out there.
Well, the military and the alphabet agency can actually file for patents with looser restrictions than we get. If you go to file a patent on the thing, you have to be able to demonstrate that it conceivably works and stuff, and they don't have to do that. They can do preemptive patents. So sometimes some of the stuff might even be phony. Like they get a patent issued for something that actually doesn't work, or is very theoretical, just so that their adversaries will say, "Holy cow, they got something like this," and they'll waste a lot of time and resources on it. So you got to be careful with that, because the patent office has different rules for the government agencies and for the civilians.
Yeah, well, we don't know that there is a patent number, and it does exist. And you use microwaves and the capture tune channel around the outside of the triangular craft to generate this kind of
get ready, turn right.
Electric propulsion system.
Turn right.
So
do you have, Keith? Do you have that patent? Could you post it on?
You can Google it and just look for Navy's UFO patent, and you'll find it. And you can go
get ready, turn right.
Well, I'm requesting that, seeing as you've already done this,
Yeah.
Could you put it up on
Turn
under
right.
Richard's items or your items later on this show?
Yeah, I can put it.
Okay. So let me just go to, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Danny and everybody else. But the other major thing I wanted to mention out of the box is number
Go
one
straight on.
in my items. And this is a book called UFOs, Myths, Conspiracies, and Realities that I also highly recommend.
Turn right.
It's kind of the antithesis of the UFOs and Nukes. The UFOs and Nukes book is the more important one by far. But the UFOs, Myths, Conspiracies, and Realities is by John Alexander. Dr. John Alexander, who is basically, quote, the father, if you will, of so-called non-lethal weapons research and development in the Pentagon. And interestingly, this is someone that I know personally, because when I was in the White House, I had just received the world's first and the United States first ever fully accredited graduate degree in consciousness studies and experimental parapsychology. That was from John F. Kennedy University, which was, it feels like a, completely different incarnation within a single lifetime of mine. Because as I was literally finishing my coursework at John F. Kennedy University in Orinda, California, in the East Bay, San Francisco Bay, I was picked up and dropped in the West Wing of the White House. And, my life changed ever since. But I do have that worldwide first ever degree. And so I ended up in the West Wing of the White House, right over the Oval Office, with this first ever accredited graduate degree in consciousness studies and experimental parapsychology. And so I was brought to the attention of John Alexander, who sought me out for lecture dinner. I can't remember what it was. And also invited me to a number of parties at night and that kind of thing. Anyway, somebody I know. And basically his book is saying what Danny said and what I agreed with Danny earlier on in the show. And that is that effectively nobody that you can name is clear to know about this stuff. Not really. Not even the President of the United States. So that's the gist of his book, but I want to read you this one section that jumped out at me like a waving red flag. And I'm just going to read these two paragraphs. Because I want to remind you that a number of people who I think are very wise in this field are saying, in fact, a week ago on Richard's show here, his first guest on the show, and they were talking about what they expected to happen at the hearings 3 days later. So this was last Saturday. His first guest, whose name I don't remember, but his first guest was a professor, and his first guest focused on the relationship between what consciousness really is and the so-called UFO, UAP, bright orb, or the called lightning experiences that people have. Okay, so given that, I'm going to remind you also of Whitley Strieber's latest book. Whitley, I can't remember I'm going to get it off of Amazon and send it to you.
Wait, I'm confused. You're introducing and talking up one book that you've got a picture of, but you're going to read something from Whitley's book, which isn't here.
No, I'm going to read something in a moment from my number one book. I'm just reminding you as context before I read the two paragraphs that Whitley Strieber's latest book is on the connection between death, near-death experiences, and UFO experiences. Okay? So now I'm going to read you from John Alexander's book. And this is mind-blowing. Okay. It's on pages 35 and 36. This is John Alexander. Only once in all of the dozens of briefings that I gave, John Alexander gave, did I ever get a negative response. In all other situations, general interest was shown, and what he's referring to is the book is about all of the briefings that he gave as to what he knew about UAP, UFO experiences, bright orb experiences, etc., to the highest levels in the intelligence community in the military, in the United States and overseas. So he says, only once did I get a negative response. In all other situations, general interest by these extremely high-level people with very high-level clearances was shown, along with some reasonable skepticism by some was stated. However, over time, there was more and more evidence that no formal UFO program currently existed. Now, that's his bottom line, and I know, or I believe very strongly, that that is a lie. Nevertheless, this is the bottom line of John Alexander's book, that there's no formal UFO program in our military and intelligence community, that it's someplace else. Okay? On this one occasion, continuing, things turned really ugly. After I briefed General Max Thurman, who at the time was the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, the number 2 4-star position in the United States Army, he asked me to address the Board on Army Science and Technology, known as BAST, BASD Study Group, that was examining the Army's use of space.
Exit right.
Heading the committee was a man by the name of Dr. Walt LaBerge, an eminent scientist who had previously served as Principal Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering, also as Undersecretary of the Army, also as Assistant Secretary of the Air Force, and was then at the time Vice President of Lockheed Martin. Among his many accomplishments, this is pretty amazing, LaBerge was the co-inventor of the Sidewinder air-to-air missile and had led the team that built NASA Mission Control Center. His distinguished career had brought him close contact with many advanced developments in the U.S. space program and the UFO-UAP area of investigation. Attending this vast meeting were 10 scientists along with Dr. LaBerge. Almost done here. For about an hour, I, meaning John Alexander, ran through my usual briefing, informing them that the universe was probably not built the way they thought it was, and that UFOs and UAPs deserve serious attention and consideration. As I concluded, LaBerge asked the other members, scientists in the group, if they had any questions or comments for me. There were a few pretty good questions from the attendees who seemed very interested in what I had been saying. And then the most amazing thing I have ever witnessed in any scientific meeting I have ever attended took place. Suddenly livid, LaBerge slammed his hands down on the table and began screaming at me. His first comment was, quote, and this is the punchline, "You're not supposed to know about that. That's what you learn when you die." Okay? So,
I see why you connected it with Whitley.
Keep left.
That's why I mentioned Whitley. I think that there is a connection, and I do recommend people reading Whitley Schreiber's most recent book, and I will get that on Amazon and send it to you, Keith, to add to my items.
Okay.
So those are the main things I wanted to mention so far.
Yeah, I put in the Skype chat a link that I'm going to include from the Richard stuff right now, and it's the Forbes website, and it talks about the patent and the other patent. There's the second patent for the fusion energy source that they plan to use to power this planet. So
Okay. Great, thank you for doing that.
yeah.
I think, isn't it the case that people need to refresh the show page for tonight in order to see that?
Yeah, well, I'll set it to automatically refresh your page. The browser's running constantly. But I thought most people would have known now that that patent was filed, because when they released those videos, and then shortly thereafter,
Keep right, and then exit right.
Salvador Payas, I think that's right. He's the one that filed the patent, and they said that the patent office was going to reject it until one of his naval superiors stepped in and said, grant the patent, we have a working prototype.
Turn left.
And that's what kicked this whole thing off. And I think the Navy is coming forward, and they want this technology, but they can't bring it out unless they explain where it came from or how they came up with it. Colonel Philip Corso, when he wrote the book, The Day After Roswell, took the day after Roswell. He explains that it was his job at the Pentagon to disseminate the technology from the crash of Roswell into our society. And I always wondered how we jumped over the vacuum tube era, because we should have been in the vacuum tube era for quite a while longer before we jumped into solid state. And when Bell Labs filed their patent for the transistor, first solid state device, the patent office was going to reject it because they said this thing won't work without a heated cathode. That's vacuum tube technology, a heated cathode. They couldn't understand the technology behind it. And in the case of this electrogravitic propulsion system, it's the same thing. They don't understand something that they didn't know about or were trained on. So I think in order for us to move into the next generation of technologies, these guys have to get across to know where they came up with this knowledge from. And we've known for the longest time that the whole thing with Roswell's been, they've been lying through the teeth about it. Jesse Marcel, first man on the scene, or military man on the scene, when he became older, he did an interview with Stanton Friedman, and he said, it was a cover-up, and that the technology and the materials that they picked up was not a dessert. And everything he described, his son even saw when he was younger, and as he got older, he told his story. It's the kind of stuff that goes on that they don't want us to know about. But
well, isn't that what the hearing was about? I mean, we're getting a little off track here, because the idea was that the hearing was at least a hearing, and people have ended up, the general public has kind of shook their heads and muttered over this UAP obsession, because nobody's going to stop saying UFOs. So, I just wanted to. Richard has something he wanted to insert here because he decided that it was as important as the hearing itself. That's why he has the image on his items of his number 5, the surprise is official, the Mars doorway is not a door. Everybody's heard that story last week. And he's got a very nice picture of it there. And I actually saw one of the other articles about it that if you look at the picture, just as at the small size, blow it up if you want. On the left, there's what looks like a hole that's kind of structured, and on the right, there's this nice little doorway, and in between them is what looks like a building. It's not Bauhaus, but it looks structured. And the thing is, half the pictures I have seen referencing the doorway story have shown the thing to the left, which is a crack in the rocks, probably, not the defined doorway on the right side. So they're running a little scared on that, and it's interesting that the story's out there at all. I think about that. And this
Could we go back to the hearings? I'd like to hear from Danny about what he knows about Sean Kirkpatrick.
Excellent idea. Sure.
Yeah. Well, Sean is an interesting guy. Sean is a physicist who's been put in charge of the program. He's worked for almost every division of the military, including the U.S. Space Command. He's a graduate of the University of Georgia, where he did his undergraduate and postgraduate work, and did his additional postgraduate work at the University of Illinois. Interestingly, he has studied a huge range of things in his postgraduate studies, and while he's been working for the National Reconnaissance Office and others, including the extremely interesting the study of the tissue of the brain of adders, a particular kind of snake that can perceive heat signatures, can see in the night with infrared detection. I found that to be a really interesting element of his PhD work. And here he is now, the head of the new task force in the Office of Naval Intelligence that's been demanded by the Congress.
That's very interesting, Danny. That's really interesting because in the hearings we were told that the apparent triangular shape was because of the processing through the night vision goggles.
That's right.
Well, what they're trying to say is that the single lens reflex camera, SLR, the lens, the iris makes that shape of a triangle when it irises down. But the thing is that if the night vision was that bright that you had to iris your lens down that small to make that little small triangular opening to reduce the circles of confusion to make it sharper, and then you'd go blind if you were putting those glasses on, night vision goggles on. So I don't think that's what that is. I think that's just an excuse to explain what that is, because the stars should have been virtually triangular shape as well. So it's a.
Well, but I didn't see any stars in those videos.
I did, but they're small. They were smaller. There were some that were a little bigger, but you'd have to have a bright light, and in order for it to make that single triangular shape, but there was more than one triangular shape, and to get two triangular shapes from different angles of lighting through the iris like that, that's not possible. But it's an excuse that they threw out. I've seen other videos where you've seen the irises creating a reflection like that.
Trying to kind of shrug this off.
Well, anything that's round you can claim as an energy ball or ball lightning or something like that. But something that's triangular has geometry, and it's good. You have to come up with some.
I'm gonna have to interrupt you. We're at break time, so when we come back, we're gonna pick up where we left off, and hopefully everybody's enjoying the show. So we'll be right back after this break.
Keep right, and then turn right. Turn right.
Othersideofmidnight.com. Join Richard C. Hoagland and an array of fascinating guests as we explore real-world topics and events through the lens of hyperdimensional physics. Join Club 19.5 to gain access to hundreds of archived shows. Only $9.95 per month. Listen in each Saturday and Sunday to the most compelling and thoughtful broadcast heard in over 160 countries around the world. Real research, real data, real science. TheOtherSideOfMidnight.com.
TheOtherSideOfMidnight.com. Talk radio with pictures on demand. Liberate your hyperdimensional time scale and non-linearly access over 400 hours of conversation at the cutting edge of science and thought. Join Club 19.5 to get access to exclusive content that fits your interests and time schedule. Filter episodes by guest or subject. Membership costs $9.95 a month, 33 cents a day. Talk radio with pictures on demand. TheOtherSideOfMidnight.com.
If you're in hyperdimensional, one thing you'll find is essential is our club. 19.5 a hyperdimensional storage case, a treasure trove of outer space. Our club 19.5. All the data we've accumulated, you'll find here, titled and collated. Why don't you just drop on by and give our club a try? If you're into hyperdimensional, you'll find our credentials are fine. Club 19.5.
And welcome back to the other side of midnight. We're going to pick up where we left off. We're having a great conversation right now. Where did we leave off? Let's get
Hey, Keith.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would it be possible? I realized that Richard Hoagland can't go on Skype, I suppose, but couldn't he join us by phone?
Richard's phone is a cordless setup, and it's likely that the battery would run down before he actually could contribute to the show. But I told him he should have a hard line, but he's working.
Well, I think, with all of his expertise, I'd like to ask Danny Sheehan if he's, I'm sure he's thought about this quite a bit. Danny, if you were designing the investigation the way it should be, how would you design it? Who would be in charge of it? And just tell us what you've thought about that, if you have.
Well, actually, I've had a number of discussions about this because it turns out that Lou Elizondo, whom I represent, is in fact the principal advisor on UFOs to the U.S. Space Command. And one of the tasks that they have is trying to figure out how to assemble various task forces to look into specific pieces of this whole phenomenon. So I've had actual direct conversations about this very subject. The things that I pointed out is that it's absolutely essential to not allow the only source of investigating this phenomenon to be inside the United States military, because it completely skewers the analysis of this phenomenon. This is a consequence of the United States being a national security state. Since the passage of the National Security Act of 1947, and even though the total rationale for the creation of the National Security Act of 1947, which went on to create the Central Intelligence Agency and later the NSA, etc., was ostensibly to forestall the Soviet Union from taking over the world, allegedly. With the dissolution of the Soviet Union on December 31st of 1991, with the official signing of the resolution on the part of President Gorbachev releasing all of the republics, there wasn't the slightest flicker of attempt to stop the Central Intelligence Agency, and NSA and these other agencies from continuing. Rather than even consider disbanding them, what they did is they determined that they had to be increased in their funding so that they could establish full spectrum dominance over the whole planet. And then we know that that's what they did in the 1992 United States Defense Department Policy Planning Guidance document. It was created out of the Defense Department under then Secretary of State Dick Cheney. So the very first thing I would say is that we have to take this out from under the exclusive control of the United States military.
And by the way, I just one quick comment before you continue, because it's really relevant, came out of the hearing. And it was another shocker. And that was that one of the members of Congress on the subcommittee, I found it interesting, was subcommittee on counterterrorism, counterintelligence, and counter-proliferation, but counterterrorism included
Yeah.
this subcommittee. But one of the members on the subcommittee asked the two witnesses, with all of their high-level clearances, if they either had in their database or plan to have in their database any data on UFOs, UAPs, orbs, whatever, outside of the military and presumably also intelligence community, i.e. the general public. And they said no.
Right.
And specifically, they said, I believe it was Moultrie, but one of the two of them said, no, our protocols are going only to allow into our database the, quote, data that we control, and therefore, no, not outside.
Well, there's
Why is that strange?
Well, there's an additional thing that happened in that conversation, and they were saying, in fact, they ought to start considering how to criminalize or declare unlawful any false information that is being promulgated about the issue of UFOs. They actually discussed that.
Really, I missed that, Danny. I missed that. Are you serious?
Oh, absolutely did. Yeah, they absolutely did. I think it was Ronald Moultrie was saying, that there's a problem with the people providing information outside of military channels, and that a lot of this information, without them having any basis for knowing one way or another, since they were completely ignorant of the subject, that information was being conveyed that was false about this, and that some steps ought to be considered by Congress to take steps to outlaw this kind of public statements about the issue. That was
right. Well, I do remember there was a question by a Republican representative that basically set him up for that answer.
Yeah.
Because the question presumed that there was a national security problem with normal citizens. Maybe saying something that wasn't under the control of the
Rick Crawford, who was the Republican from Arkansas, Rick very clearly had just a hardcore right-wing, closed-minded attitude about this whole thing. It was that kind of discussion, that kind of consciousness that was reflective of this. But
what is a right-wing, closed-minded consciousness?
It's pretty obvious.
What the hell are you talking about? This is beyond politics. I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second.
It's not beyond politics. I've been at this for 50 years, and I know it's not beyond politics. There's an entire fascist element here that is intending to capture this technology and put it at the disposal of major corporations so that they can...
They already did that. That's where most of the secrets are held. You know that as well as I do.
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying, is that this is a hardcore right-wing alliance between corporations and the instrumentalities of the state. That's what fascism is. And
what would the left-wing alliance be in contrast? This is what I meant. What would a left-wing alliance be in contrast to that? What are you proposing would be a better choice?
I'm not proposing this is a better choice. I'm just saying that clearly you don't want to have this issue dominated by right-wing fascist thinking, and that's the problem. To think that the only reason that we want to be investigating this whole thing is to try to transform the technology into a weapon system. That's for the purposes of establishing quote full spectrum dominance over the planet. That's what's going on here.
How do you know that?
How do I know that? Because
wait. Okay, no, go ahead. Finish your thought, but I got a point to this.
I read the 1992 United States Defense Department Policy Planning and Guidance Act. That's the actual terminology that they use. And so that what I'm saying is that the investigation of this particular phenomenon has to be opened up so that it's not just the military that is examining this and holding the information close and working with major corporations to transfer the technology to them to try to use it to develop weapon systems for the military.
How do you achieve that? What do you do to achieve that?
What
Exactly.
you have to have the State Department involved in this. You have to have the Justice Department involved in this. You have to have other branches of government involved in this, and you need to have the academy. You need to have universities
How
involved
does
in it.
giving more parts of the government a piece of the action open it up to the public? I'm confused. And
No,
I do have a point behind this. I'm just letting you untangle your own statement.
no. You heard what I said. Is also you have to have universities involved in this. You have to have
They're the same thing. They're more closed-minded than the military is.
Well, there needs to be public participation in the examination of this particular subject, and it cannot be confined not only to within the government but within the executive branch. Because as you've noticed, the Congress of the United States, this is the first hearing they've had in decades that they don't seem to be engaged in evaluating this entire phenomenon yet. That's why this hearing is so important. Because if you leave it inside the executive branch and the executive branch chooses to leave it inside the military, you're going to get this constant myopic vision of what this is all about. The old Sufi saying is that when a pickpocket meets a saint, all he sees are his pockets. And so that when the military is the only one investigating this particular phenomenon, and they're actually suggesting, potentially criminalizing, other people being involved in this, in making comments about it, because it's somehow dangerous to the national security. This is a serious problem. So what we need to do is we need to open up. We need to have task forces involved in looking at this. There's spiritual questions about this. There's religious questions about this. There's philosophical questions about this. These are not the strength of the military.
Yeah, well, this is still an expansion of the basic old saying, somebody ought to do something. I mean, let me give the point that I've got buried in here is that this stuff, and by this stuff I mean any sort of alien technology, requires two things. One, you have to acknowledge that there is such a thing as alien technology, i.e. not based on our parameters of science. And two, it's as simple as fire in its own terms, meaning that you can't give away or reveal or develop one little piece of it without giving all of it away. It's all interlocked. It's a whole different sort of physics. And by doing, that's why they hide it all, because they can't, I mean, if you kick out little pieces, like, little things that aren't really relevant, Velcro, transistors, fiber optics, these are things they were able to pry out of there. But if the basic physics, which has to go into, you have to go into if you're going to do propulsion systems and so forth, is offered to everyone, yes, all the governments are going to try and build weapons. And yes, people are going to misuse it horribly, and that's why they sit on it. I'm not saying I approve of that. I'm just saying that more committees, just like more hearings, won't help it. You need to have another weight balancing the beam.
Well, Ron is kind of right about this. When you have a technology like this, you can't give out little snippets of it because you're going to miss something. Ben Rich, the head of Lockheed Skunk Works, he said that there was a flaw in the math, but they figured it out. And Bob Lazar said at a point in time, the Russians who were working on these projects, they were suddenly kicked off and let go, because he said they figured something out. He didn't know what it was, but listening to James Goodall, he said that these guys had come up. Ben Rich said they figured out the math, and now they had the propulsion system that was 50 light years beyond anything we can imagine, and that we can travel amongst the stars. And Ben Rich is telling James Goodall all of this on his deathbed. Okay, so we have the technology, but if you figure out the math, that's the key. And that's what Lockheed Skunk Works did, and that's why we have the TR-3B and a whole bunch of other things that can do the stuff that they do. But we are not privy to that because we're not supposed to know about this stuff. Okay?
Right. They have developed some of the technology, but they have to do it. They have to keep it clandestine.
Right.
So you won't even know that that F-18 going overhead has a black box in it that can do magical things if they think they can get away with it with nobody noticing.
So,
Well, all I'm saying is this: that you know the fundamental one of the fundamental challenges that we have in dealing with the issue of the UFO phenomenon is that the logical conclusion that most people have come to that are doing the close examination of this is that this represents a technology from an extraterrestrial civilization, and that the relationship between us and the members of the extraterrestrial civilization is a matter to be determined by a lot more than just our military. That there's all of our other institutions as a human family need to be involved in trying to determine what our relationship is going to be with these other beings.
Now there, I agree with you.
Not just try to take their technology and turn it into a weapon, so that we can, one or another of our nation states can subjugate the others. This is something that this is an extraordinarily important time period for our human family. We're going to be determining the nature of our relationship with an extraterrestrial civilization that's going to affect us for thousands of years here. And to be so myopic that we're just kind of talking in terms of let's keep it in the military and let's keep it secret because we can't let other people know about it. This is extraordinarily dangerous. And
that's the stuff we already have. That's what they're hiding. I said, that's the stuff we already have. That's what they're hiding. And the thing that needs to change is the recognition that there are others out there and that they might as well come down and talk to us because we're not going anywhere.
Well, they're in contact. I think they've already come down and talked to us. Quite. I think somebody said about 5% of the U.S. population. How many millions of people would that be?
Yeah, I agree with you. But and people say, why don't they land on the White House lawn? Well, I don't particularly want to talk to any of those people in there. Do you? I can think of much.
Remember, the president isn't cleared.
Yeah, we're clearing, smearing. I mean, in terms of they're going to talk to ordinary people because they want to know what they're up against. I mean, there are differing opinions as to whether the ETs have the same kind of politics as we do. But the only thing I reject, all possibilities are open. The only thing I reject is the idea that they're so transcendental ascended beings that they are beyond all worry and want. That's nonsense. They're pretty much the same as we are. I cite as proof.
Back down to earth just a little bit from the whole ET idea, with two other fascinating revelations in the hearings, seeing as that's the subject of tonight.
Okay, but this was where Richard wanted to push it, so go ahead.
Well,
go back to that.
Just two other major revelations, at least to me. Now, maybe Daddy Sheehan already knew about this, but I didn't. As I mentioned before, it was revealed that the Navy will be managing and in charge of this new office directly under the Secretary of Defense. Not the Air Force, not the Marines, not the Army, the Navy. Okay, that's number one. Number two, it was revealed that these videos that were released starting in late, I think it was 2017, these were, we've always known that they were Navy. They were released by the Navy, one from an aircraft carrier, another from an F-18 Navy fighter jet. But what was revealed in the hearings that was new to me was that they were in Navy training ranges. So these are training ranges by definition. While any of our military services are doing an exercise or a drill or a war game, that is secured airspace. And it was also revealed that, or at least the claim was made, that they have determined, or believe they know, that there were swarms of drones in the general area of the so-called UAP at the time of the video of the UAP. Now, drones are very man-made, okay? And this reminds you of the unmarked black helicopters that have been seen in association
Go straight
with
on.
some, not all, but some, not only cattle mutilations, but also so-called UFO sightings. So there's something very down to earth about at least a good portion of these as well.
Are you guys familiar with the September 17th, 1989 Voronezh incident in Russia, where the craft sat down and a group of children saw the entities get out, but they were tall entities. It looked like they were wearing some kind of spacesuit with 3 eyes on it or something. And there was a symbol on the bottom of the craft. Are you familiar with any of that?
Yes.
I've read about it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because when it came out, I was trying to tell Ted Koppel, there was something familiar about the symbol on the bottom of the craft, or on the side of the craft, and on the suits that the kids had drawn. And I found it. It was a picture that was taken in 1966 or 65 or something like that by these two brothers. And it shows this double pie pan white craft turned up on its side. First it was horizontal, and then it turned up on its side, so now you can see the bottom of it. And that symbol was on the bottom of that. And if you go to my section in Radio with Pictures, you'll find it, the pictures in there, and you can see that incident. The kids drew a picture.
The Uranus symbol.
Yeah.
But if you think about this very hard. It looks like an H with the I in the middle, or a division in the middle. If you take the diagonal vertical lines, the corners of it, and you flip those ends over to the center I, what symbol do you get?
I don't know what you're asking us.
He's asking to reverse the outriggers so that they're pointed, so that the points are pointed toward the center.
So that they're pointed inward.
Yes.
Well, it's a cross. A cross.
You end up with a swastika.
You do?
Yeah. Take the upper corner, the quadrants, turn them sideways so that they touch the center division, and you end up with a swastika.
In other words, you make it a cross, and the bent ends make it look like a swastika. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, you take the ones, the fourths, and turn them sideways so they touch the center, and you get a swastika.
So like a swastika with a vertical line through it.
Nope. That vertical line is the other part of the swastika. You're taking...
Keith, what's the point of that? It's a symbol. It shows
I know
something.
it's a symbol.
You can say that it's either right or it's wrong, but why would you then mutate it to make a difference?
Don't make me use the takeover button, which is spelled MUTE, okay? I'm telling you.
It's a fair question, brother.
I'm giving it to you, okay? If the Nazis did set up a base down at the Antarctic, and that's why we had Operation High Jump, they could have this technology, and they could have modified the swastika to look like this, and they may still be flying these craft. And that's why this craft was taken, the picture was taken in 1965 or 66. And whatever the kids in Russia saw, that was probably a technology that was man-made, because these guys were looking like they were wearing spacesuits. But then...
Why don't we just use Occam's razor and say that this is a symbol of Uranus?
Yeah, you could use that. But I'm thinking it's maybe just the modification. Maybe it's not. But then 5 years later, in September 16th, 1994, there was another incident that involved like 60 or 7 children in Zimbabwe. And John Mack John Mack investigated it. He was a Harvard professor as well, and he had to fight Harvard over this whole thing, along with Bud Hopkins.
The Ariel School sighting.
Right.
Yeah.
By the way, Dan represented John Mack. He was his attorney.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. So that was exactly 5 years, almost to the day, that incident that took place in Russia took place. And as you go down in my images, there are the pictures that the kids drew. And all of them drew this craft embedded between the trees. It landed between the trees. And it obviously so impressed them the way this thing was sitting in between the trees that all of them drew the craft surrounded by these trees. And you don't do something, kids don't do stuff like that unless there is something that catches their eye and they don't understand it, but they can draw an image based on it. And all the kids drew the same thing. And then if you go down to my image number 6, there's a whole bunch of drawings of the little big-eyed gray guys that we've been knowing about for some time now that they drew that came out of these craft. And if they're the Zeta Reticuli who claim they're us 24,000 and 52,000 years into the future, it's something to think about. But kids don't lie. I mean, of course they make up stuff, but you can't get all the kids to be on the same page at the same time in an event like that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I've never seen those drawings.
I would have brought this up at the hearing. If I was at the hearing, I would have said, are you familiar with the Voronezh incident? Is there anything related to that that's going on now? Or are you familiar with the Zimbabwe experience? And they probably would have said, well, we're not familiar with that. That's not in our UAP task force
No,
information.
and it wouldn't be. They explicitly said they weren't going to include anything like that in their database.
Yeah. Why would you start now in 2020 or 2019 when they started this whole thing instead of going back and looking at everything up to this point? It's stupid. You don't have anything.
To be fair, I believe it was Bray. Yeah, it was Bray, who did say that they have gone back into what he called legacy data, and they have now expanded their database, going back in history to unexplained incidents. They've gone from 144 in the original report to 400. So to be fair, they have gone back in history.
Okay. Well, I still think they're trying to whitewash this whole thing, but they're making an effort because they have an alternative agenda. They want to bring this technology forward so they can utilize it in their arsenal, but they don't want to admit exactly where it came from. But we were told by Colonel Philip Corso, hey, this technology he disseminated into our society through their government contractors when he was at the Pentagon. And night vision, laser, fiber optics. He said we had these wafers. We now know they were microchips. And he even told he told a story to Linda Moulton Howe about how they took this wafer and they connected it to an electric golf cart with no batteries in it, put a drop of water on it, and they're driving around in this electric golf cart with a drop of water on this wafer. And he told this to Senator.
Who's the day you're referring to doing this?
It was the Pentagon guys that Corso was working with, and he was disseminating the technology to companies like Raytheon and so forth. And he didn't give it to. He didn't give anything to. Gosh, I'm forgetting who came up with the transistor. Oh gosh.
Bell Labs.
Bell Labs.
10:31. I don't know if you need to take a break, Keith. It's 10:31.
No, I'm good.
Whoops.
Oh yeah, blew through the break. Okay, guys, we're going to take a break here, and when we come back, we'll pick up where we left off, and hopefully this will turn out to be a good time. Okay, you're listening to The Other Side of Midnight. I'm your host, Keith Morgan, and my guests will be back in a second.
Leave things at home, I'm out of reach. All I need is what I have, perhaps my broken
theothersideofmidnight.com. Talk radio, with pictures on demand. Liberate your hyperdimensional timescale and non-linearly access over 400 hours of conversation at the cutting edge of science and thought. Join Club 19.5 to get access to exclusive content that fits your interests and time schedule. Filter episodes by guest or subject. Membership costs $9.95 a month, 33 cents a day. Talk radio, with pictures on demand.
Ready to roll.
theothersideofmidnight.com.
theothersideofmidnight.com. Tune in to listen to Richard C. Hoagland and his fascinating guests. Join Club 19.5 to get access to exclusive member benefits.
Get ready to turn right.
Search the archives.
Turn right.
Listen to past episodes anytime on any device.
Get ready to turn right.
Membership costs $9.95 a month, 33 cents a day. Support the broadcast that provides you with the most interesting conversation available. Talk radio at the cutting edge of science and thought. theothersideofmidnight.com.
It's all over.
I will sit there all my lazy days. I'll waste my time away. Nothing much to do, so I will wait till sunlight burn them clouds away. She burn them clouds away.
And welcome back to the other side of midnight. I blew through that break, but we're going to pick up where we left off.
Time to hit the road.
And
I have a question for Danny Keith.
okay, go ahead.
Danny, I believe I heard you say that Lou Elizondo is advising on UFOs to Space Command. What can you tell us about what Space Command is doing?
Well, that's that I don't know yet. They're still sort of standing up the unit. There's been lots of discussion going on about how the Space Force relates to the Space Command. That there's a lot of bureaucratic shuffling going on around here because this all was triggered, by Trump saying, let's just full scale, let's establish military domination over space. Just kind of a little brain fart that he had. And he says, here, let's get this going now. And so that he advocated setting up the Space Force. And that they've stood up the Space Force. They've now they're generating uniforms and symbols for them, etc. The Air Force is pushing back. The Space Command people that had been operational are pushing back. So it's not at all clear to me exactly what the structure is. Our focus is figuring out how to put together a comprehensive set of task forces that can address all these different issues. My objective is to try to get, as I pointed out a while ago, more input into the process of evaluating this whole phenomenon than just the military. And not, of course, not just other government agencies or not just universities, but to try to get, all of the different ranges of things that need to be discussed about this. Sociological, social, psychological, economic, political, what are the public policies that need to get put into place, assuming that we're dealing with a highly advanced extraterrestrial civilization, members of which are right here on our own galaxy, who apparently have the capacity to come and go from our planet. If we're going to move as a species into a new phase of consciously and collectively acknowledging the existence of these beings and trying to establish some kind of diplomatic relationship with them, there ought to be more people involved in this than the military. and the major corporations that are making their money for their stockholders building weapons. I mean, that seems to be obvious on the face of it, that we ought to expand beyond that. But the bureaucracy is tending to rivet down on that type of exclusive perspective on this whole issue.
Daniel, there
Yes.
was an insight. There was an insight on exactly that in an article that Gizmodo had a couple of weeks ago, and it had over 40 of the unit insignia for it, and it seems that what has happened is that they're trying to use NASA at this point as a sort of a clearinghouse, because what they're doing is setting up individual units, and the Navy's setting ones up, and Air Force is, everybody's setting up units with specialties, and so there's some duplication in that, and so they're trying to sort it all out, and according to that, it was just a reference, but it's the clearest thing I see. They're using NASA to pull these together, because otherwise it's a cat fight, between the Navy and the Air Force and so forth. But they are putting it together, and there's a whole bunch of it. We just don't realize how much of it there is
Are
yet.
you referring to Space Command? What are you referring to by it?
Yeah, I'm talking about Space Force. They want, in order to give it some sort of central clearing house and office building, they haven't quite decided. Whoever they might be within the government haven't quite decided how to go about this yet. They're still squabbling about it. So currently,
I went to the DoD website before the show a couple of days ago, and Space Command is not a separate military service.
No, that's not Space Force. Space Command's been around for years. In fact,
I
you'll
meant
see them.
I meant Space Force. It's not a separate.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So, I don't think Trump came up with that. I think they maneuvered him into that position because
I'd appreciate it if people stopped blaming this stuff on Trump, both you and Daniel. It's a good idea. Time had come, and the only thing that he was involved in was picking a name for it.
Yeah, I don't think he even picked a name. It was probably he was maneuvered in that direction because this is all part of the coming out party where they're going to dump all the stuff onto us. The technologies that we think we have that's supposed to be so sophisticated and end-all be-all, we are just scraping the bottom of the barrel. There are technologies that people haven't even dreamt of yet that still are on the drawing board that are going to revolutionize everything. And I know I could talk about the technology all day long because that was my thing. As an electronics technician, I saw all the stuff that was going on behind the scenes.
Did you see it working, or did you just see people talking about it?
No. Stan Myers, he had a way to convert water to hydrogen using very little current.
Yeah,
that was part of the lie.
There have been 50 gazillion magic engines.
Troy Reed with the Reed magnetic motor. I saw his spot come through ABC going to an affiliate in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And Stan Myers, his was going to an ABC affiliate in Ohio, in Akron, Ohio, or wherever he lived. And I'm like, why isn't this national stories? We're in an energy crisis, and these guys got technologies that could have got us off of oil. And no, it never went national. And that's what pissed me off was the technology.
You forgot the Japanese guy with the bicycle, with the motorcycle, or scooter, or whatever it was.
Yeah, the Japanese had a car that you could drive for 50 miles for 1 hour on a liter of water. Okay?
Yeah.
And then all it did was electrolysis on the water. Now you've got Bloom Energy. They have an electrolysis process, just like Stan Myers. He wasn't using a lot of current because the lie was it takes as much energy to tear the hydrogen and oxygen apart as what you get when you put it back together, so you're not getting anything. But if you use resonant frequency will cause anything to tear itself apart without a lot of energy. Okay?
Keith, get prepared to yell at me because I'm going to stamp my foot. Richard asked me specifically to bring one thing into the conversation, and everybody's running away from it.
Okay, what's
talk
that?
about other stuff. He thought that the conference was a conference. You know, how many times can you say, well, of course they didn't tell us the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and yes, they were uninformed and everything. Okay, fine. The reason that he has that image in his images of that doorway is because he wanted to talk about it. Now, either we can cover that or just abandon it, and I won't mention it again. But he had a reason, and
well,
the reason
to me,
was
the most interesting fact about it, if it's correct, is what I've heard. I believe it was a week ago. Today's show is that it's only about a foot high.
That's not true.
No.
No, it's not. Yeah, and the size wouldn't matter anyway. And
I think it does matter.
Well, it would matter if it's manufactured. It doesn't make any difference. It doesn't matter if it's a small window or if it's a great big door. But it clearly looks like a manufactured part.
Okay, so Richard wanted it raised. What does he want us to know about it?
Okay, well, there's a little reference. If you scroll down to the pictures that Keith kindly forwarded over from last week when it didn't come up. Everybody keeps dodging this. Look at my stuff. Bronze items, last and lowest there. There's a reason for everything there. The first picture, the upper left image is Anubis, and the only reason it's there is if you look at the base, which was part of it, wasn't added by the museum. Notice the shape in there. Okay, those are actually false doors, depictions of them.
Yeah, you're correct. They're very, very important in ancient Egypt.
Exactly. So you go down to number 3.
Well, that false door is Osiris's door.
There you go. And so there's a couple of nice depictions of the way that works on number 3 and 4. And I like number 3 because it's all complex, and I'm still staggered by how nicely those pictures are. How nice those pictures are. Nicely, I sound like Trump. Those pictures were taken in the expedition in 1903. That's why they're so pristine. They hadn't started screwing stuff up then. And Chemnifer was not a pharaoh. He was just a rich guy that could afford a big complex. But number 4.
What is it we're looking at in number 3? Where is that?
It's on the Giza Plateau. It's one of many, many other ruins that's there.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And those are some outside views. And if you blow any of them up, it's all the same complex. They're pictures from different directions. All that tall, skinny stuff, those are doors, false and otherwise. And the way that this is actually very simple. Number 4, obviously just the doors. The one on the left is the entrance to the complex. And then you wander around inside a bit, and you get to the door to the tomb, which resembles very much the door of whatever size. It's on that picture from NASA, which, admittedly, I don't know the exact size, but notice the misshapen lintel at the top of it and everything. It's all the same. And on the extreme right, you have the ultimate in false doors, which is the little white part there. If you blow it up, you can see that's a hole all the way through it. And it was to allow the ka of the deceased to come out and at least smell, if not sample, the foods and everything else that were left to entertain them. They didn't really have the. They wanted to keep the presence of a pharaoh or a past luminary around, but they didn't really want them active. That's why they extracted all of the internal organs and put them in jars, so that they couldn't reanimate the body. But they wanted the spirit to have an animal.
Obvious here. This is a tomb, and that is the subject of death and what comes after it. And I remind you about Whitley Strieber's book, and I remind you about that incredible quote that I read to you from John Alexander's book.
Absolutely, very, very relevant.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the only little trick on here is number 5. That's a curiosity photo, and if you blow it up, you notice that thing in the more or less foreground that is kind of oblong and strangely up on one edge. If you look at it closely, then you go back up to number 1,
Well,
you'll
hold on.
notice.
Hold on. Where in the photograph? On the left, the right, the middle, what?
It's on the right. What you're looking at there is a section of a foundation, I would say. It's part of a panorama which is much bigger than that. This is, and if you look at the larger version, you need that just so you can see the detail. That thing in the front, like I said, it's kind of teardrop shaped, and it's up on its edge, and it's right in front of everything. Yeah, that's actually a carving or a little sculpture of a tilapia, a fish, which was the primary food fish in ancient Egypt. And tilapia have a pronounced face, like some aquarium fish do. And if you look up at number one, that's why the thing at the bottom there, that's another sculpture, this time from Egypt, of a tilapia. So you can kind of see the similarity.
Isn't a tilapia bottom fish, a flatfish?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and if you turn it, the one that's depicted in number one, I didn't bother to waste a frame on both sides, but if you look at the other side of it, it looks like a salver. Those things that you serve a fancy steak on or something like that.
Can I ask? I don't know why is it we're talking about this? I'm not sure exactly how we got.
Well, because to make a connection between ancient Egypt and the supposed doorway. Oh, sorry, Barbara. I didn't mean to step on.
It's not directly relevant to the hearings. It's just that Richard Hoagland is the host of the show, couldn't be here, and he wanted this discussed, at least briefly.
This is more of the Mars stuff, Richard Mars stuff.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, this is actually my Mars stuff, but it's just the idea is he came up with he wanted to include that supposed doorway because of it looked Egyptian, and so this is just some backup evidence of how Egyptian it looks. And he wanted to make that connection, which I think is as important as anything else, because that would indicate that, yes, a lot of people in positions of authority had known for a long time that there's a connection between us and there. And if we're the Martians, then we got here from there using technology that we don't currently have, not even Elon has. So it's, fair enough to say. And I talked about it last week, but number two is just on the left, that's the sculpture of an owl, which is very, very rare in ancient Egypt stuff. I'm sure Barbara can explain more than I can why it's rare, but they seldom had it, depicted owls. And so the MoMA was very happy to get that. And on the right, there's one of the badges from Space Force. I've got like 50 of them collected so far. And it's one of the, I think it's electronic counter-espionage. They have all sorts of fancy titles, but you'll notice the owl on there.
Let me point out the obvious again, back to the hearing, which is our main topic, and that is the Admiral Wilson memo, was the EW memo, Electronic Warfare Counter-Espionage Subcommittee.
That's why I mentioned it. Yeah. So best not to be scared. Best not to be scared of the Mars connections. There's actually another one. If anyone bothers to look at the larger version and look behind the fish, there's a square-cut block in there, which couldn't have happened from erosion or anything else. So that's the real connection with the one that was circulated around everywhere last week. So
okay, I agree with Danny. I think we should go back to the hearing.
Yeah, we're going to go back to the
hearing. What else is there to say?
Well, we're going back to the hearing because we're going to be picking up Stephen Bassett in about 8 minutes.
Oh, good.
Excellent.
Excellent.
Yeah, because he said he'd be able to make the third hour. So.
Yeah, and I'll have to jump off too at 11, you guys, because I've got a major event tomorrow morning that I still have to plan. We've got all of our major funders coming to the museum here in Santa Cruz to celebrate the passage of the first stage of our California Green New Deal bill.
Danny,
yes.
Would you be able to stay on for like the first 5 or 10 minutes of Steve Bassett, though?
Sure, you can. I'll do it.
Yeah.
But I do
just beginning to overlap.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. I'm gonna pick him up probably like when we go into the break, and then bring him on because you said he could make the third hour, and hopefully he's available. He might be available now, but I'll kind of give him a call or something, see if he's available.
Okay, why don't you do that? And we haven't heard that much from Ron or Braun. Ron, do you have comments about the hearing?
I do. I think it was better and more useful
Go straight on.
than I hear some other opinions about. I'm realistic about the nature of secrecy, and people that have to deal with it on a daily basis it's an automatic reflex. You don't want to speak out of turn, and they obviously selected, as you pointed out, I believe, the people to speak there as people that were carefully underinformed so that they wouldn't get into areas where they might accidentally be tricked into saying something they shouldn't. But I think it was for the public. It wasn't for the politicians. People had asked for these things, and Stephen should certainly be happy that finally something got rolling. And Rubio, I think, was the most the biggest driver on this. He's taken it as a political item.
So why Rubio?
He wants to be president someday, and he picked a topic that other people were scared of to make and I think he made a good choice in that it's not self-destructive. Everybody agrees that there's things that we're not told about stuff, and everybody from the days of the crash test dummies falling out of the balloons at Roswell. People are fed up with those things, so it's not a bad choice.
There's another side to the coin, and it was explicitly mentioned at the beginning of the hearings last Tuesday that this is maybe the only topic that the Democrats and Republicans could agree on to hold a hearing and not fight over. So, again, my question, why Rubio? Because it really doesn't help one party over another that I can see.
Well, that just proves that he wants to be president. He wouldn't care which party he was in if he got the job. He's not just a partisan hack, apparently.
Well, I think he is.
Well, okay, maybe he is, but I mean, I think it's a personal choice on him. He inarguably chose this as one of his things to champion. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he's not part of the committee, one of the committees he wanted to be part of. I don't know. He's been doing this. He's been talking about it for several years.
Yeah, so, I'd like to hear from Danny. You mentioned that it was important that Adam Schiff, who is the head of the overall House Intelligence Committee, why do you think it was so important that he was there?
Well, I mean, you've got to understand that all of this that's happening right now is a continuation of the kind of major initiative that's been undertaken starting in December of 2017 with the revelation of the videos in the New York Times coverage in Lou Elizondo going on major 60 Minutes along with Chris Mellon. They've been working, I've attended several meetings, with different Congress people, and you got to understand that Lou Elizondo, his father was in the 2506 Brigade or the Alpha 66, hardcore conservative, Cuban refugee stuff, and he's a military guy. He's really quite conservative, and he's reached out initially to conservative senators and Congress people because he thinks that they are going to be more responsive to the issue of the national security threat that he's very concerned is not being adequately addressed. He's frustrated about that because he can't imagine why a UFO coming up over a Minuteman nuclear base and shutting off nuclear weapons, isn't generating, generals running around the Pentagon with their hair on fire. But it's not. and he's
Well,
totally.
they claim it's not. They claim it's not.
No, it's not.
Amy
That's the point. That's exactly the point. Which means that that they are not briefed in. Above them, people above them know that somehow this is not a national security threat. They're not responding to this as though it were a real national security threat, and that is causing a great deal of consternation among other people, and so that Lou and Chris and others have been reaching out to members of Congress. They've reached out as far to the left as Gillibrand now, and they've got and they've got Rubio involved, who is a very conservative guy in the Republican Party, and they've got Gallego. Gallego is a major military guy who is going to be running against Sinema for the Democratic nomination for the Senate when her term comes up. So the point of it is that the reason that the conservative people like Rubio are involved is because that's who is being approached by Lou. to be blunt about it.
Okay, guys, can we hold it here? We're coming up on the break again. So
Marco Rubio and Alpha 66, Lou's father. Is there a Cuba connection?
Well, it's the hard right-wing Congress senator from Florida.
Okay,
that's what they are. So he goes, his guy.
Guys, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm going to break, so we'll have to pick this up on the other side, okay?
Okay.
All right, you're listening to The Other Side of Midnight. We've got a heat. A moment after the break.
Richard C. Hoagland here. I'd like you to support The Other Side of Midnight by subscribing to Club 19.5 and thereby joining our unique and growing radio community. Tune in to listen to our fascinating guests, pioneers on the out there edge of science and thought, and gain access to exclusive member benefits. To do this, just visit our website, theothersideofmidnight.com, and click on the Join Club 19.5 link in the navigator bar or in the left-hand column. Membership costs $19.95 per month. That's 33 tetrahedral cents a day. I mean, it's the price of a couple of cups of coffee. As a Club 19.5 member, you'll gain access to this show and literally hundreds of previous shows on hundreds of different topics going back to 2015 that we have done. Our archive shows have the commercials removed, and you'll be able to download the MP3 files directly from the 19-point archives if you prefer. To enhance your listener experience, a new The Other Side of Midnight podcast is being added to all show pages, which will allow you to instantly search the show archives of Radio with Pictures, thus easily accessing the corresponding show. Plus, you can just as quickly access the entire podcast list when you're on the go. I want to personally thank all our Club 19.5 members because without your continuing support, this show would literally not be on the air. Please continue supporting the broadcast that provides you with the most interesting conversation available, talk radio at the cutting edge of science and thought, and if you like what you hear on The Other Side of Midnight, tell your friends, and continue growing the show by having them subscribe to Club 19.5 as well, because we need all of you. And when I say we need you, you're the reason we're doing all this. Hoagland, over and out.
Everything is clearer when you're dealing with the mysteries of time and space. The other side of
And welcome back to the other side of midnight. It looks like I've picked up Stephen Bassett, and now it's going to get really interesting. Hi, Stephen.
I'm sure it was quite interesting to Danny, but I'll do what I can.
Well, yeah, Danny kept us amused. Yeah, he did a great job. He's going to have to probably dodge out of here. And if you guys want to talk about anything between each of you before he leaves?
No, Steve and I talk to each other all the time.
Yeah, no, we're good.
Yeah, I know.
He needs to get to bed. He's an old guy, He's got to get some sleep.
I see all this gray hair, but both of you guys are terrific. I just want to let you know that I'm proud of you to sticking up for this and keeping their butts in the fire, to get this information out. And Daniel, it's great knowing you, even though we read virtually. So if you have to,
I wanted to wait for Stephen to get on board so he could pick up here to talk about these hearings, because I say that it's important to see the positive dimensions of this hearing that have taken place, even though it's disappointing that the Bray and fellows that were there that didn't, Ronald Moultrie didn't say anything much, but there was it's a very important meeting to take place. The fact that Adam Schiff was there as the chairman of the committee was extremely important. The fact that it pressed them into appointing Sean Kirkpatrick to be the director of this program after 6 months of doing nothing because the hearing was coming on, and they knew they had to do it. And there've been a few important pieces that have come out, and it's the beginning of the series of hearings that Stephen has been working at for so many years to get to happen, and people kept telling him that it wasn't going to happen, and he kept saying, yes, it is, you watch. And so, I'll pass it over to Steve now to continue to point out the positive aspects of this, even though neither Scott Bray nor Ronald Moultrie were really very well briefed in and have a very narrow focus of just telling you over and over again that there's going to be a common, protocol set up for reporting. So, Stevie, take it away and explain to people why this was much more important than they might think it was at the beginning.
Thank you, Danny.
Very good. So who's with us here? We got Keith. Who else? Is Richard with us?
Hi, Stephen. This is Ron. I'm here too.
Okay.
You got Barbara and Ron. Richard had a power outage, so I'm making sure that we get a live show out tonight.
He's got the worst power. He's got the worst power situation than probably anybody in the
They said the wind was actually shaking his house.
Oh, Lord.
He's out in the boonies.
Okay. Let me really put this as I'm getting better, and I just finished 2 interviews. I got another one tomorrow. Of course, I'm loving that. But let me put this in as few words as possible. Here's the deal. U.S. government has known about the ET presence since Roswell, and it's been dealing with it since Roswell. All of it classified programs, deep, USAPs, and everything else. God knows how many tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars they've spent on dealing with the ET issue. At the same time, they had to also maintain a truth embargo. That was a decision they made, and they had their reasons for it, national security. And so it's simultaneous with investigating, monitoring, whatever, to the extent that they wished, the ET issue, as well as dealing with the dead bodies. They had to somehow contain the issue from the public to keep it from becoming an accepted and formal reality. That was the truth embargo. So these 2 things have been going on for 75 years. Okay, so once you know that, it starts to make sense why so many of the things you're seeing don't seem to add up, right? When they talk about, we started seeing reports around 2000, I'm going, are you kidding me? And it's easy to get frustrated. But the second thing everyone needs to know is that this is not about setting up a entity in the Pentagon and setting in protocols and what have you to discover anything. This is not about discovery at all. This is about public relations. This is a public relations maneuver with high stakes. Now, one of the ways one analogy you might use is this. We've had to deal with the Soviet Union over the years, during the nuclear arms race, with a lot at stake, huge issue. And they had to get together and they had to talk and they had to go through kind of a song and dance, a diplomatic song and dance, in which you try to work your way to a place where the two nations come to some sort of agreement. And I can assure you that in that process, that dance that's going on, they're lying here, they're lying there, they're playing a game here, playing a game there. That's the nature of diplomacy. So this is similar to that. The lying is primarily a matter of keeping the process on track, not letting it go off the rails into the woods, because if it does, it could set it back. So that is what's happening. And so setting up the AIM-SOG to start looking at reports, they've been getting reports for 75 years from their own people. There was 13,000 reports submitted to Blue Book. Right, the last thing they need is more reports. But what they need to be doing is trying to do is show you that they are trying to do, quote, the right, if a little bit late. And so that's the same for the Congress. The Congress is refused to have hearings for 54 years. Probably the DOD was behind a lot of that, but there were plenty of people in Congress that weren't going to do it. They didn't want to take the risk. And so the Congress is now coming into the game finally and doing what they're supposed to do. And the effect of this, the simplest way to think about the public relations, there's many aspects to it, but the effect of this is that they're putting distance between themselves and the truth embargo. So you go back X number of months, whatever seems right to you, and you go, and at that point, X number of months ago, the DOD was still, maybe actually a couple of years really, the DOD was firmly in full truth embargo stance. We don't know what you're talking about, we're not going to tell you anything if we did, and tough, right? And the Congress was in the same position. We don't know anything, right? We don't know what to do. We have no interest in it at all. And then suddenly they start to come around. So what's happened is now people are starting to see them do these things, and that's putting distance between them and when they were not doing these things. And so even though it's still going to be very awkward that the post-disclosure world is not going to be a picnic for the DOD or the Air Force, the Navy, or the Congress as well. They have a lot of tough questions to ask. But people tend to remember what's happening in the moment. And so people will recall and know that they were trying to do the right thing for a year, 2 years, maybe 3. And now we know the truth. The ET is here. And yeah, we sort of know they knew it all the way back in 47. But hey, I'm giving them points for trying and trying to do the right thing. So that distance that they're creating is key to the public relations benefits, right? It's about looking good, minimizing damage, bringing the people into it, having a more joint process where the Congress is involved, the DOD's involved, the public's involved, and ultimately the president gets involved at the very end. The president's not going to get into this. He's going to stay out of it completely because he wants this thing delivered to him, not by let's say, a Lawrence Rockefeller or some third party. He wants it delivered to him on the basis of the testimony that the Congress and the DOD are able to present to the world. And once that testimony reaches a critical mass, and he's going to be able to say, I've talked to my people, I've talked to the DOD, it's clear that this evidence confirms an extraterrestrial presence. I am confirming to you today, we are not alone. This will be far less political that way. It's obviously political because he's a Democrat. But disclosure can only come from the president. There's only one party and president in the White House at a time. But this will make it far less political. It will be far more difficult for people to say, oh, this is some ploy to get reelected, or you're trying to pull some game on us. No, it's going to look like he's doing the right thing because all the evidence that he will watch, everybody else is watching too. You know, it's going to be then reasonable that he comes to a conclusion similar to what everybody else has come to. This is a healthy, non-destructive way to finally end this 75-year-old deal. I'm totally supportive. The hearing that we just had perfectly fit into this scenario. I was quite happy with it, but several very significant things happened, and I can go into that here.
Please.
Okay. Most notable things about the hearing. One, it happened. That's the most notable. Two, Adam Schiff, leading into the hearing, publicly supported Carson several times. Didn't have to do that. He then shows up at the hearing, sitting up there at the top of the table with Carson, opens it up, says good things. Afterwards, he also says more good things. So why, he didn't have to be there. What is that all about? What Adam Schiff has done, without putting himself out too far, is say, I completely support this process. I am fully aware of this process. And anybody in Congress is paying attention knows that I'm going to call a hearing for my committee, too, eventually. Who knows when, but soon. In other words, the House Intel Committee is going to hold a hearing, which sends a very powerful message to Mark Warner, the Intel Committee of the Senate, okay? In other words, well, Mark, if you want to get out in front of this issue, you may want to get going here because I think Schiff's getting ready to do something. And I can tell you this with a high confidence. If this basic icebreaker hearing, not complicated, short, didn't go into much depth, but potentially said what was going on and answered some questions, okay? This made it to C-SPAN 2. The next hearing, even if it's another subcommittee hearing, will make it to C-SPAN 1. But the first hearing in front of the Intel Committee is going to be broadcast on multiple networks, maybe even cable network or two, and around the world. It's going to be watched by many tens of millions of people, right? And it will also have a classified session. So this is how quickly things could escalate, and Schiff has put the marker down. I may be the next, we'll see. So that was important. But then other things happened, okay? Probably the most notable was the actions of Mike Gallagher. I believe a Republican congressman, Marine, vet, sharp guy. I see potential national possibilities there. So he does something that I think most people didn't expect. I happen to think it was orchestrated. I think that the committee in advance agreed that he would do this, and we're okay with it. All right, he just didn't pull this out to try to pull a stunt. And I'll tell you why in a minute. So during his questioning, which was relatively vanilla, all of a sudden he hits Bray with a very significant question. I've heard, or there's been reports of large globe coming down over one of our military SAC bases, Malmstrom, and the missile turned off. Do you know something about that? Whoa. Now that is a pretty significant moment. I'm sure that Bob Salas almost fell out of his chair when he saw that. And then, which put Bray in a very difficult position. And believe me, the number of members of the DOD and the military services that have been in difficult positions because of the truth embargo is a long list going all the way back. One of the most notable is John Haynes, who did the 1997 press conference and had to lie through his teeth the whole time. And so here's Bray. What is he going to do? First of all, if he really doesn't know anything about it, it's very embarrassing, though it's not shocking. These men were high-level officials that were appropriate for that level of an operation that were put in charge. They weren't put in charge because they've been studying UAP and listening to the other side of midnight for the last 15 years. So it wouldn't surprise me if he didn't know anything. And if that's true, he had to say that. Well, that's kind of embarrassing. So he's going to take a lot of grief, and he has. But what else could he do? But let's take it up another notch. Let's say he did know something about it. What does he do then? He has a couple of choices, and they're all bad. One is to say, yes, I'm aware of it. Boom, instantly. More questions to follow. You're aware of the nuclear weapons campaign being turned off? When did you know? Are you aware of the other cases? And on and on. And the whole hearing now is getting way out in front of its skis. So he cannot say, I know, even if he does know. But then there's the second position, which you see all the time now. Luis Elizondo has probably done it 400 times in the last couple years. And that is acknowledge that something, you're aware of it, but you can't get into it, right? I think Lou usually says, I can't really go there. Can't do that. Now, in many cases you can. There's a lot of things that are classified you get asked about that you can say, I'm aware, but I cannot go into it except in classified session. This is not one of them, okay? This is the classic example of an unacknowledged special access program. You're in it, but you can't even admit that you're in it. You can't even acknowledge it exists. That's why they're used in our government. They're extremely effective, and the truth embargo relies on them. It's kind of like that. The question, are you aware that our nuclear missiles were turned off at Maelstrom? If he says, yeah, but I can't go into that except in classified section, boom. He's just acknowledged to the world that, yeah, the DU has been aware of it, and it's so important it's in classified, and he can only talk about it in that setting. This is way out in front of their scheme. So he simply has to tell the truth and be embarrassed or lie and have to take the heat for that. So that's what took place there. But then something else happened. Gallagher immediately raises the issue of the Wilson-Davis notes, which he says has been talked about and is kind of controversial. Are you aware of that? Ray says no. Probably wasn't aware of it, frankly. I think that's less likely that he would know about that. But it's the same thing, whether he knows or not. He has to say no. And then instantly Gallagher turns to his right and says, and holds up the copy he has and asks Carson, I'd have permission to put this into the record without objection. Instantly Carson says, no objection. He didn't even give time for anybody in the room to object, right? Because that would be awkward, wouldn't it? What if one of those members like the Hood objected, no, I don't want those in there. Why don't you want those in there? And so I think to avoid embarrassment, and they do this all the time, I think they agreed in advance, he's going to submit this, it'll be without objection, nobody's going to say a thing. Okay, so that happened, it was over very quickly. But guess what? The Wilson-Davis notes are back in play, baby, right? And they're already talking about, let me see, who's I saw this? Let's just say that I think it's already kind of out there, but I can't pin down the sources right now, that maybe now it's time, well, that Davis would have to come before the committee at some point, some committee, and discuss it. It's in play, it's controversial, it has national security implications, so essentially he just made Eric Davis a witness for a future hearing. Okay, fine. But he also put it back in play again, right? Non-trivial thing. And so those two things alone were basically a hint of what is to come, a little teaser, right, provided by Mike Gallagher. Now, interestingly enough, Brian Bender, the great reporter of Politico, has been covering this issue along with lots of other national security stuff. He got in touch with McCormick afterwards. I'm not McCormick, with Gallagher afterwards. And he asked him about why he did that. And here's what Gallagher told him. He said, well, I think we need to get these things dealt with so we can resolve them. You know, I don't think that there's aliens I think dealing with our military bases, but I think it's important to settle these matters. Okay? Now, I thought that was interesting, right? And I actually emailed Brian about this. And here's what I said to him. I said, if I'm McCormick, if I'm Gallagher, if I'm Gallagher, I did what I did, and now I'm talking to a reporter on the record, right? That's a little different. What he did in the committee hearing, he did it, put it in the record. He didn't have to answer a question about what he thought. And so now he's talking to a reporter on the record. And I believe in order to cover himself a little bit, right, take a little pressure off, he doesn't come up and say, oh, yeah, I've been following that nuclear missile tampering stuff for years. Those witnesses should have been given hearings 20 years ago. No, he says, I'm just trying to resolve the issue. Now, that's Mike Gallagher's a pretty good guy, a righteous guy, having to play the game. There's going to be a lot of that, all right? So those were important. As far as the videos, the funny thing about the videos, first of all, they were deliberately not particularly impressive, right? They didn't want to bring up anything impressive because that gets into a whole area of questioning that they don't want to go to. This is not the hearing for that. But they needed to bring something. They knew that. So they brought up the two that we all saw. And the interesting thing about that is while everybody is complaining about how ridiculous they were and how trivial they were, and for most people, the vast majority of people, they were non-significant, or they weren't significant. But for someone who's been dealing with this issue for 26 years, and I think Richard probably may have seen the same thing, they were very important, but you just didn't know unless you knew other stuff. Here's what I know that most of the people watching those videos didn't know. The first one, about that thing that went by those jets at 1 million miles an hour, right? They're so fast, they could not, it took them forever just to get a frame on it, right? There it is, a little frame, okay? And so, yeah, kind of ridiculous.
They didn't know how to
That
use
video-
VLC.
Yeah.
How do you come to a presentation and don't know how to use your software to be
Yeah,
able
or
to
at
do
least put
frame
a
by
still
frame?
frame. You know,
Yeah.
do a still frame and come in. But you know, because they weren't preparing for anything profound. They're just kind of it's a show, okay? But guess what? What most people don't know, and have to tell them, is that event, and there have been several like them, is when our jets have actually had these things screened by. And in some cases, they've got a much better look at them than you saw there. And what that thing is a transparent sphere with a black cube in it. And the reports are that it seems like the cube touches, the edges of the cube touches the sphere. And it has no means of propulsion. Now, I'm going to say, frankly, that's a hell of a lot more exotic and interesting than the Tic Tacs. So that is actually a big deal. And recently, Ryan Graves has been interviewing, Leto rather, the podcaster, been interviewing Ryan Graves, who's doing some fantastic work. He goes into a lengthy discussion with Leto about how they have seen these things in groups, 4 or 5 or 6 of these flying transparent spheres with cubes in them, followed in a kind of a V formation, followed by a Tic Tac or gimbal type one behind them. So that video actually, if you run it to ground completely, is hugely significant. Now let's move on to the drones. This one is funny. So you got all these drones flying around the ship, and they've been seen. They've been up on the internet a number of times, and so he's showing that. And he decided to go a little proactive here. So he's talking about, well, we think these drones, the light kind of, it's infrared, and then the light has to filter through the infrared camera, and the effect of that is to make them kind of look like triangles. Okay, people are listening to that and they're going, oh, okay, they were just drones flying around the ship, and they kind of look like triangles. Okay, not a big deal. Oh, no. Let's be really clear. Anything that gets near a U.S. warship at sea, it's going to have a limited amount of time to get the hell out of there or be blown to kingdom come. Period. Okay? Whether it's a Cessna or a drone or a rubber boat, right? Or a kayak, right? That's what happens. And so the idea that all these drones are flying around one of our warships, and we're taking films of them with the infrared camera, right? But we're not shooting at them. We're just letting them hang around until they leave. That's about the silliest, dumbest thing I've ever heard. And so if you know enough, you know that, in fact, that's a significant event. That they are filming something in infrared that maybe can't be seen with the eye, that is around their ships, and they don't know what it is, but they strongly suspect it's extraterrestrial. And I believe the standing protocol with our military for some time is you don't shoot at extraterrestrials. All right? So you see how things are not quite what they seem. But those 2 videos were there, and they're in play, and I'm talking about them right now, aren't I? So that's important, right? And then another thing that happened is this, that I love this. Tim Burchett, who is not on the committee, but he's a good old boy, Tennessee Republican, right? Hell of a lot smarter than he sounds, I can tell you that.
Turn right.
He recently has taken aggressive measures, and he's gone public with strong statements.
Turn right.
But 3 or 4 days ago, he outdid himself. He was with Leland Biddard on the News Nation program. It's a right-wing show, internet show, similar to Fox. And so he's Biddard is really getting into it. He's really excited. He's talking to him about this issue because Burchett had said a number of things. And so at some point, Biddard, all excited, he says to Burchett, he says, look, I only see 3 possibilities here. Right? It's either our advanced technology, which we're out testing or something and it's being seen, or it's advanced technology of the Chinese or the Russians that are out there flying around near our ships and being seen, or it's extraterrestrial, it's alien technologies from outside this planet. And before he could barely finish it, Burchett says it's number 3. Well, guess what he just did there? A member of Congress did exactly the same thing, but with a much smaller audience that Robert Bigelow did in May of 2017, where Bigelow said twice, the extraterrestrials are here. There's the extraterrestrials here. Well, Burchett just said the same thing, because if it's number 3, it's extraterrestrial. Case closed. And then Biddard goes on and talks to him. Okay, so that didn't get a lot of play because News Nation is not exactly Fox News, and it's certainly not 60 Minutes. So what happens is that Burchett makes sure that he's in the audience for this hearing. There weren't a lot of people in that audience. Again, this is a subcommittee hearing, but he's in there, knowing that the reporters were going to seek him out, and they did. And so he's interviewing right there in the hearing room to the reporters, and he just tears into this thing, right? It's ridiculous. We need to have witnesses here. That. In other words, he's saying all the things that were being said on the net, in a sense, making it clear that this is not satisfactory. Well, fine. It's one thing for somebody on a podcast to say that. He's a sitting member of Congress. Now, I checked him out, and he's not on any committees that are relevant to this issue. He's probably never going to sit on a committee. But let me tell you, there's an awful lot of members in Congress right now who are sitting there wishing, by God, I wish I was on the Armed Services Committee or the Intel Committee or a National Security-based subcommittee. But I'm on the Agricultural Committee and the Trains and Planes Committee or whatever. I'm not going to be in one of those hearings, but man, I would like to be. And so Burchett is essentially getting himself into the picture, right? He's put himself in the frame, and he's going to be leading this thing going forward because he has said the strongest statements to date of any member of Congress, including Rubio, Gillibrand, Walker, Warner, Diego, Shaheen. He has gone further than any of them, and includes obviously Mike Gallagher. So I'm interested to see what Burchett has in store for us. So that took place after the hearing. So I hope people can see that, from my perspective, this was a great opening move. A lot of great things happened that we're going to be able to work with. It's generating huge amounts of press. What's not to like?
Okay, Steve. We're coming into the break right now, so Barb, we'll come back and pick that up as soon as we come out of the break, okay? So you're listening to The Other Side of Midnight. Steve Bassett has joined us, and Daniel Sheehan, he had some things to do, so he's gone. But we're still having a great conversation, and we're giving Stephen a lot of head leeway here, so he can get in a lot of stuff that he knows about. You're listening to The Other Side of Midnight, and we'll be right back.
TheOtherSideOfMidnight.com. Tune in to listen to Richard C. Hoagland and his fascinating guests. Join Club 19.5 to get access to exclusive member benefits. As a Club 19.5 member, you'll gain access to the rest of this show and all previous 350 episodes. Membership costs $9.95 a month, 33 cents a day. Support the broadcast that provides you with the most interesting conversation available. Talk radio at the cutting edge of science and thought. TheOtherSideOfMidnight.com.
TheOtherSideOfMidnight.com. Talk radio with pictures on demand. Liberate your hyperdimensional time scale and non-linearly access over 400 hours of conversation at the cutting edge of science and thought. Join Club 19.5 to get access to exclusive content that fits your interests and time schedule. Filter episodes by guest or subject. Membership costs $9.95 a month, 33 cents a day. Listen while you travel or as an environment to your endeavors. 8 cents an episode, 2.5 cents per hour of content. TheOtherSideOfMidnight.com.
welcome back to the other side of midnight. Okay, we left off with, I think Barb had something to inject, and Stephen is really rolling. So, Barb, go ahead.
Yeah, three kind of related questions, actually, for Steve Bassett. Number one, you must be very, very pleased. Like to comment on that. Number two, we learned in the hearing, to my surprise, but probably shouldn't have been, that the Navy will be the lead of the new organization that's directly under the Secretary of Defense. If you could comment on why that's important and why the Navy. And do you have the Admiral Wilson EW Notes memo? And if so, could you send it to Keith to post on the show? Steve?
You're muted, Steve. Unmute.
Very sorry. I always do that. I don't have the Davis Wilson notes handy. I think they can be found on the. I think they can be found on the internet. If you do a strong search, I think you can find them. And I just haven't done that lately. So give a shot at that. I just have a feeling they can post.
Let me ask: have you read it?
I'm aware. Yeah, I read them, most of them about I don't know, a couple of months, 4 months ago. I know the basic stuff that's in there.
Well, so if is it a correct understanding from the hearing? Did I understand correctly that the gist of it is that the head of the DIA was denied access to the UAP information?
I don't know if that came up in the hearing. It might have. I don't know. I don't know if Mike Gallagher said that, but. One of the many things that's in the notes is the circumstance in which Wilson was to go look for or check in on some USAFs and couldn't get any information.
Oh, you mean Admiral Wilson himself?
Yeah, and so
go straight on.
Pretty sure. Yeah, and so there's two eyewitnesses to that. I mean, there's at least two witnesses that actually went up to the hill, went up to wherever, and met Wilson and asked him to do this. And so that in the notes is correct. So,
what was Admiral Wilson's position when he was denied access?
It was high level. I know that. I don't know.
Obviously, Navy.
Yeah, he had a high level position, no question. He had substantial access. Right, to the programs that they wanted him to check into. And he was told basically go pound sand. Now, again, this is a guy, high security clearance, high level, and he doesn't want to be attached to this. So it did not shock me at all that when they got in touch with Wilson, he denied everything. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately for him, there were two witnesses that met with him to set him off on that mission. But he's decided I'm gonna stay out of this. Which puts a little pressure on Eric Davis, but Davis's decision was not to say anything. All right. Now, if those notes were not, he didn't take those notes. Now, remember, he took the notes. Does that mean that they're right? Meaning he might have written something down wrong. He could have made something up, though I doubt it. But if he didn't take those notes, if that was a hoax, there's no way he lets that go.
Yeah.
He denies it.
Well,
the fact that he hasn't denied it is very impelling.
There was a reference to the head of the DIA, I thought, being denied access, or was the head of the DIA one of these two witnesses?
Again, you've caught me in a sense. I'd have to review those notes. I could give you intelligent answers on this. What we know is this. If everything in those notes is in fact what Wilson told him, it is a massive blockbuster. It's the kind of thing that would trigger hearings all in and of itself. So that certainly explains why Wilson absolutely denies everything. Davis, as you know, was part of the, not part of, but Davis has been a significant figure in research in the government. But he's a researcher. And so he is at this point keeping his distance, but by not saying anything. However, without question, it seems inevitable that he's going to be called up to the Hill to testify at one hearing or another, along with some others. About the Wilson-Davis notes, in which case he'll tell the truth. A lot of these people, by the way, that know things, their views, I think, not inappropriate, that look, I don't want to be just throwing my stuff out there to some researcher or journalist that shows up to be trashed and trolled and picked apart. I've got important things to say. I'm going to say them in front of a congressional committee under oath, along with others. That makes a lot of sense. But of course, the researchers, they want it now, and they pick at people. And would you come out? Would you come out? I don't blame them for waiting.
Okay, I understand.
So if I answered those three questions for you?
Well, that was the first question. The second question of the three was, can you comment on the fact that it was revealed that the Navy will be the lead military service of the new office?
I kind of missed that, but
that was very explicit.
Okay, all right, I missed it. Well, obviously, you know that one of the people that are running the program is the deputy.
Bray.
Director of Naval Intelligence.
Right.
Well, I can only say this. There is a story here which is interesting, but we'll probably not learn it till after disclosure. But the story goes roughly like this. In the early days, and this phenomenon is, of course, driving the government crazy, and they're having to deal with it, organize, respond, and what have you. They created MJ-12, which was basically an advisory panel to the president, and obviously maybe did help set up management, so forth. It totally makes sense. But in terms of what we'll call direct investigations of the issue, classified level, they went with the Navy. And so the Navy was involved very early on, possibly with the most intimate aspects of dealing with this phenomenon. The one theory I heard was that the reason they chose the Navy is because most people would not necessarily think that the Navy would be where it would be. So they'd be looking in the wrong place. They'd be looking at the Air Force, all right? But the deep secret stuff is going on over somewhere else. So it's basically a nice little diversion move. Makes sense. So the Navy's doing all the early research. Meanwhile, though, they do bring the Air Force in, don't they? In the form of those projects, particularly Blue Book. So while the Navy is probably under deep secret programs doing lots of research with respect to all things ET, UAP, what have you, that needs to be done, the Air Force is handed the job of essentially do an elaborate, quote, investigation of the phenomena that was bogus. In other words, the Air Force was used as a screen, a cover. So everybody's densely focused on the Air Force because it's actually looking at sightings, and it hired Alan Hynek, and they're going and doing reports, and wow. Meanwhile, the Navy is completely ignored. Of course, their end result is that the Blue Book will be one of the biggest, probably the biggest black eye on the Air Force of all time. And since then, the
Navy avoided the black eye too.
I'm sorry?
The Navy avoided the black eye.
Oh yeah. I mean, they got a free ride. The Air Force takes all the hits, and then and for that reason, the Air Force after Blue Book basically disappeared. And as you go back year after year after year, nothing from the Air Force, and even nothing from the Air Force since the Nimitz event was made public, fully public in 2017. And the reason I think for this is that their history is so bad that they know that if they get into this, and they could easily do that, they have planes with cameras too, you know, that if they get into this, it's just going to draw a lot of attention and bring all that stuff up. And so they're just staying out of it. It looks bad, it looks awkward, but it's probably the right decision. And they're letting the Navy get the glory. And so almost all of the pilot witnesses are Navy pilots.
Right.
Now, one of the reasons that might be not unreasonable is that the Navy is out at sea, and the ocean is wide. And so you can imagine ETs might fly a lot of stuff out there and because it's much less likely to be seen. And so the Navy does have a chance to see them in ways, plus perfectly black skies, all that kind of stuff.
One of the things that was very explicit in the hearings, you probably caught this or already knew it, is that both of the videos that were shown, one off the East Coast, one off the West Coast, they said, they were both in Navy training areas.
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
This is an interesting point. It's hard to believe that, well, the drones, those things that are being called, quote, drones flying around our ships, the number of craft that were in the vicinity of the training session by the Nimitz carrier group, it's hard for me to think that, well, the carrier group was in the right place at the right time. I think there was a bit of an escalation there. I think the ETs know that when they're seen by Air Force or Navy or civilians, this stimulates the situation on the ground, stirs it up, raises interest.
How can you be sure that they weren't referring to man-made drones? I mean, I'm reminded of the unmarked black helicopters that are sometimes reported in connection with so-called UFO or UAP experiences. It wasn't clear to me that they weren't referring to man-made drones.
Which film are you talking about? Which instance?
In one of the two instances.
The two videos?
One of the two videos.
Yeah, the infrared.
Yeah.
Here's the reason. Okay. First, again, these ships are out of sea, so the idea that some college kids got some drones and got into a motorboat and somehow caught up with a Navy ship and flew some drones around them, that's ridiculous. Okay.
Well,
Second possibility.
Nobody's proposing that. Nobody's proposing that.
No.
The possibility would be that they would be Navy drones or Air Force drones or CIA drones. Or,
Well, you know that, but I'm talking about the general public. I'm trying to dispel the drone thing. Okay, so that's one thing that's ridiculous. The second thing is that they were flying them. The ship was flying them and filming them, but somehow allowed it to get out that this was not them and somehow some third-party situation. That's ridiculous. There is another possibility that these are drones from, say, Chinese, one of our adversaries that would have the guts to fly drones near our ships. That is something that's not so easily dispelled. You could see that happening, except for one thing. There is no way a Navy warship is going to allow drones, if that's what they were, flying around their warship unaddressed.
No, I understand.
They will shoot them down, period.
But I think you have to at least open your mind to the possibility that this was a, red team, blue team exercise.
No, I think that's... No. There's lots of possibilities. I only open my mind if it's worth it, if it's got enough percentages behind it. Otherwise, I'm wasting my time.
Well,
the idea that this is a blue team, red team thing that gets out, it's not addressed, not countermounted by the DOD, embarrassing everybody. The odds of that are maybe 1 in 10,000.
Well,
so,
that's not it's not zero.
It's not zero, but we gotta focus. The government over the years has wanted us to go off on every tangent possible. Something happens, establish 100 possibilities and investigate them all. As long as you don't deal with us, don't bother us.
Well, yeah, but Steve, this was the wording that was used by the witnesses. They referred to them as a swarm of drones in the vicinity of the UAP.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, if they are drones, I'm not saying they're not drones. I'm saying if they are drones, they are not human drones.
That is
they're not armed.
That's your interpretation.
Absolutely. I feel real comfortable with that.
Okay, my last question is in my items for this show when I was on with Danny and he had to leave. I highly recommend the book by Robert Hastings, UFOs and Nukes, Extraordinary Encounters at Nuclear Weapon Sites. Do you also recommend the book, and are there other books on this subject?
I have many times. I think that is the most important book possibly written on the subject ever, going all the way back to Rupo.
I do too. So everybody should go out and get it.
Yep. And they also made a documentary.
It's a great documentary.
They've done everything they can to get this issue before Congress.
Let people know where they can watch the hour-long documentary based upon the book. It's mind-blowing. You've got to watch it. I meant to put it up. I'll send it to Keith to add to my items. It is called UFOs and Nukes, The Secret Link Revealed, the documentary film, and this is the link. I'll repeat it twice. It's free. www.vimeo.com/on-demand/UFOs and nukes. So that's vimeo.com/on-demand/UFOs, that's plural UFOs, and nukes. You gotta watch it.
Yeah. I have on my
Excuse me, kids. Can I drop in a word for
Yeah, I'm done. I'm
Stephen?
done. Thank you.
Oh, no, you don't have to be done, Barbara. I'm just saying I wanted to put in a word of support for him on his reticence about the drones. Because to the best of my knowledge, and there's some there, they don't use drones like that. I mean, us. That's not the way that works. They've got better instrumentation for nearby the ship than anything the drone could provide them. And they're a separate thing. They don't want to run them into the planes or something. It's just not going to happen.
Why did the witnesses refer to them as a swarm of drones?
Because they were a swarm of drones. They just weren't our drones, but they weren't the Chinese either. He's perfectly right. You wouldn't let you'd know if there was anything foreign around there. If somebody standing on the deck could see them, then...
Well, it's highly secured airspace.
They think they think they're drones because they're making maneuvers where the rapid turns would kill a pilot. They think these things are unmanned, but they're not.
Yeah, the fact is, that's what it seemed like. That's what it resembled to them, and so they called them drones. That's fine. That doesn't mean they were drones. We don't know what they were, but I'll tell you something else.
Well, they weren't seagulls. Yeah.
Yeah. When film comes out of that kind of activity around a warship that was not addressed, meaning they don't take the necessary action, the commander of that warship he loses his command. He probably even court-martialed. I mean, it's that simple.
But by the way, Steve, was that warship or that class? By the way, I was the senior military affairs journalist at the Naval Postgraduate School for almost 2 decades, so I know a lot.
Okay, all right, I didn't know that.
And so my question is, was that warship or class of warships, whether that particular one specifically was, is it ICBM capable?
Based on what I recall seeing and reading, no, it wasn't that. Though it is notable that we have a lot of sightings from craft that are based on nuclear carriers. And we know that the ETs have a certain interest in our nuclear capabilities, so that may be another reason why the Navy seems to get a lot of action.
Yeah, because they do have their nuclear missiles on board ship.
Well, they're nuclear-run carriers. Whether they're carrying nuclear weapons is obviously highly classified. And I don't know if they would be doing that during a training exercise.
No, not during a training exercise. But that's why I asked about that class ship.
Yeah. They'd be torpedoes though, but not ICBMs. They don't
and I doubt even nuclear torpedoes. This is, you don't arm ships or any planes with nuclear weapons unless there is a very good reason.
Well, you do submarines. That's our sea triad.
Well, the nuclear subs, yes, they're attack subs. But the more nuclear weapons you got out on various craft, the more there's a risk that something could go wrong.
Yeah, the sitting duck, on the surface.
You don't want to do that. Now, I'm going to jump back to something I did earlier, which I talked about in the previous show I did. I'm asked a lot about how the truth embargo managed to last as long as it did, and how is it possible that this didn't get out sooner and all that. And in my discussions about this issue, something came up which I recently kind of thought about and said, "Oh yeah, this is worth talking about." All right, here's the deal. In May of 2017, Bob Bigelow, a billionaire space guy, somewhat known, not famous, nothing like Musk, does get interviewed by 60 Minutes and Laura Logan about his space work, but they knew he had interest in the subject. They asked him about the ET issue. And Bob said twice on that show, in front of millions of people watching, that there's extraterrestrials here. All right. Didn't generate much press. Not really. I log in all the mainstream press on my site at paradigmresearchgroup.org under resources. So no big deal. And then some months go by. June, July, and August, September, and October. In October, the TTSA comes out, which got some people's attention, raised some eyebrows. Okay, fine. And then December 16th of 2017, and December 17th, first in online, then in the paper the next day, are the articles that we all know so well about OSAP, ATIP, Elizondo, Reed, the research that was going on, and so forth. Wow, okay, it's a big deal. And very quickly we learned that a lot of the money that was put into the OSAP program went to Bigelow. He was given the bid to do a lot of that research. How much, we don't know, probably the majority. I don't think all the $22 million went to him, but they got paid. It was a logical choice. He was the one that introduced some of the issues to them because of his work with NIDS on the Skinwalker Ranch. So it's all basic, no problem. And so it gets out in these papers, the New York Times. Bob Bigelow was part of the ASOP program and this research, and he might have, and supposedly was given some materials to analyze, which he set up a lab at Bigelow Aerospace. Okay, fine. And then I thought, wait a minute, let's think about this for a second. A guy goes on 60 Minutes and says there's extraterrestrials here. And then 7 months later, it's learned that he was involved in a research project regarding UAPs that was based at the Pentagon, funded by money from Harry Reid. You would think that the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Boston Globe and a lot of those papers, the CNN and MSNBC, would connect that together, right? Meaning, wait a minute, that guy said there's extraterrestrials here. He was involved in that program set up by Reid and was getting money from the Department of Defense. Maybe we should really give that statement he made back in May some serious thought. Do you think they did that? No, they did not. They didn't make that connection. They didn't connect those dots. And I thought about that some more, and I said, yeah, that's the way it works. In other words, we're in the business of reporting what's going on now. We write it up. We no longer really dig deep and investigate anymore, but we write it up, we put out reasonable articles and so forth, we're doing our job. You know, we don't have time to go back 7 months and look at something, you know, that far back and try to compare them. We can't connect dots that deep, right? And the news talk shows hosts that got involved in this and interviewed people, you know, you can't, I mean, what are they making? They make, yeah, minimum, I think they make $2 to $3 million. Some of them are making $9 million. I know one of the talk show hosts is making $35 million a year. I mean, you know, for that kind of money, you don't expect them to have to go back and make a connection like that and put it together. No. And so it wasn't. And the media just moved on. And Bigelow eventually just kind of fades out. Aerospace closed down. He shifts into some other areas, particularly consciousness, life after death. Reed dies. And it's all just history now. Man. That's how truth embargoes get sustained, right? If the press is doing a fantastic job now, but they still are way far from doing the right job. And so not making that connection, they do that all the time, right? They just won't go back in the past, put two things together and say, we need to look into this. I'm telling you, if the Washington Post had operated that during the Nixon-Watergate scandal, I'm telling you, Nixon would have probably ended up the full term, gotten the Nobel Peace Prize, and billions of dollars in after administration jobs. But they didn't. They connected the dots and they went in there and they investigated. Well, that's disappeared to a large degree. And on the ET issue, it's non-existent. So they still have much to answer for. I hope to God we get these hearings before Bigelow dies.
Do we know why Bigelow left the field of UAPs?
Well, he just got tired of it. I mean, Reed was dying. His aerospace program Bigelow Aerospace was basically shut down. It's not clear to what extent that was his decision, or whether there just wasn't any business, or because he spoke out about this issue that NASA had had enough. Who knows? So
where did the unusual materials that he had at his Bigelow hangar go?
We don't know. I will assume they went back to the DOD, but we don't know.
His focus was on those habitats that he was financing, and that just didn't fly. It's a perfectly good idea.
No, it did fly. It absolutely did fly. Yeah. It was tested great. And since then, guess what? That contract has been given to another company.
Yeah,
They
that's
want
what I was
those
getting to.
habitats.
Yeah,
Bigelow crossed the line when he went on 60 Minutes, and I think maybe that sealed the fate of Bigelow Aerospace. Now, he's a rich man, but he's also old. And, he's been at this, he knows this. I don't blame him. Like, screw it all, right? You guys will have your hearings when you have your hearings, and this will come out. And then he got into, he has other interests, and he got involved looking deep into the issue of life after death and consciousness, which I'm sure is probably more stimulating than beating the dead horse of this truth embargo.
Yeah, and by the way, I'll just end with this comment. You weren't here for the first part of the program, but I opened my part of the program on reminding people about Whitley Strieber's most recent book on the link between all of this and near-death experiences.
Strieber.
Whitley Strieber.
It's okay. Yeah. I get it wrong all the time too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's getting. He's a brilliant guy, and he's in all kinds of areas, and he's going to find an intellectual aspect of this that others won't. So hopefully that could be very interesting, and we'll see.
Bigelow financed Dreamland. He convinced Art to do a show specifically on those kind of topics, and it ran commercial free for a couple of years.
Yeah, it was the end of Art's reign, and he's done a lot of things. I mean, there's a lot of things he's done we don't even know about. He is a hero in all of this. It hasn't worked out probably the way he would have liked. Didn't work out the way a lot of people would have liked, whether it was Rockefeller or Clinton or whatever. It's a tough
guys,
game. Yes.
We're gonna have to pick this up on another show because we're out of time. It's great to have you guys on. You've been listening to The Other Side of Midnight. Stephen Bassett, Barbara Honegger, Daniel Sheenan, and my co-host, not next week, tomorrow, with a second part of this. So stick around.